All right, watch and listen carefully here, guys. So number one, again, that was the one that had the mistake on the one that I had tweeted yesterday. All right, it should be NH4Cl. All right, NH4, is that a polyatomic ion? Yes. Okay, so this is what kind of a compound then? An ionic compound. A lot of people see the N there first and they think, oh, it's molecular because nitrogen's a nonmetal. But remember, if you have a polyatomic ion, by default the compound has to be ionic. Okay, so this stuff is ammonium chloride. Okay, again, all lowercase, guys. All right, number two has nitrogen first, this time acting as a nonmetal. Bromide is also a nonmetal, so this is a molecular compound. We have dinitrogen tribromide. Okay, again, all lowercase, guys. All right, for 3 and 4, give the formula for the following compounds. So we've got iron 3 nitrate. So iron is Fe. The 3 tells us to use the 3 plus charge. Nitrate is NO3, and it is 1 minus. So when I swap and drop, I need to put brackets around the nitrate and put a 3 outside of the brackets. So we have FeNO3 3. And for number 4, boron triiodide. So boron is B, iodine is I, and there are 3 of them, Bi3. Questions on the first 4? Okay. Indicate whether the following compounds are soluble. So we need our solubility chart. Okay. Okay, so our first one, okay, is lead 2 chloride. All right, so we look on here, we find chloride, we go down, it says soluble with most things, but not with lead 2 plus. So that one should have an NS beside it. Okay, not soluble. If they wrote precipitate or something beside it, that's fine too. All right, for our next one, silver iodide. All right, so we look up on our solubility chart. Here's iodide, same column, soluble with most things, not with silver. So that one is also not soluble. So we should have NS beside that. Sodium nitrate. Well, they're actually in the same column on your solubility chart. Okay, the one on the far left-hand side here. If they're in the same column, they're what? Soluble with each other, because it says soluble with most things. Either one of them is soluble with most things except for these weird things down here. So that is definitely a soluble compound. And guys, in general, all nitrates are soluble. Okay, in general. All right, so that is soluble. And then we got calcium sulfide as our last one. All right, so we look up sulfide way over here on the right. Okay, it says it is soluble with all of these things, amongst which calcium is included. Right, so that one is soluble as well. Those are 1 mark each. All right, and the last 2, just identifying the types of reactions. Okay, I mean, I know we went over writing them and balancing them on Friday, but we'll start out slow here. Okay, how many times have you seen this reaction? This has got to be like the 7th or 8th time, okay, that it's been on at least a worksheet or an example or something like that. What kind of reaction is it? Simple decomposition. If they just wrote decomposition, that's fine. All right, and for number 10, I've got a carbon and hydrogen containing compound reacting with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water. Only one kind of reaction like that. Combustion. Give them a mark out of 10. Let them see it. Put it in the box. So, in general, these were pretty good, especially considering it's your first high school lab report. That said, there are a few things that you'll probably want to make note of so that you don't make a similar mistake on future lab reports. All right? Because most of the mistakes I saw were format related, okay? Not knowledge or skill related, simply format related. All right? So it'd be really important to kind of pay attention to what's written up here, right? This is a version of the lab report made by me. So it would have got 100% because it's mine, and I would have marked it as 100%. Okay. So just to give you some idea of kind of things I was looking for in each of the sections. All right. Problem has to be restated in your own words in the form of a question. So can unknown samples be identified only by only their physical properties revealed by simple tests? Okay. So simply a rewording of the problem that was written on your sheet. Okay. For your design, this was the spot where a lot of people lost 2 marks. What do you have to do when you identify the variables? You also have to Explain them. And probably if you lost 2 marks, you have explain written beside your variables on your lab report. All right? That means you have to tell me why is it the manipulated variable. Did I say that the day we did the design? Yeah, and it's in the podcast, I checked. In fact, it's in both of them. If you may have noticed on YouTube, there was a lesson 5 and then there was a lesson 5 redux. Okay, because we did it kind of twice, and in both of them I do mention that you have to explain those variables when you do that. That's why it's so important to watch those. And I know a lot of you did, because one had 28 views and the other had like 14 views. So I know a lot of you were watching those when you put the lab report together, which is a good idea. Okay, so manipulated variable here was the unknown substances. Okay, so what I'm looking for is a statement that explains that to me. The unknown substances are the manipulated variable because the experimenter will be running the same series of tests several times, each time on a new unknown substance with unique properties. Okay, so I kind of say a little bit about what I think about each thing having unique properties, what's going on, and why this is the manipulated variable. Our responding variable, the results of each series of tests will be unique to each substance, and so will respond to whatever unknown material is being tested. All right, so thorough, again, explanation as to why. Controlled variables, all right, the test being performed, because in order to compare results, each material must be tested in the same way. All right, temperature, because it can affect the results of the tests and many physical properties like solubility. The amount of each substance, this could affect the interpretation of results of many tests. And distilled water is being used for solubility tests to eliminate the effect of minerals on the physical properties. All right, so something along those lines there. Okay, any questions on what's expected then of the variables and explanation? Okay. For our hypothesis, if you remember, okay, I said several times the if part of your hypothesis needs to be the premise of the experiment, or deal with the premise of the experiment. The premise we were working on is that all things have unique physical properties. You didn't have to say why. You just needed to say in the if part, if all things have unique physical properties. Okay, if all substances have. Right? So in here I've got a little bit more detail than that, but if all compounds have unique combinations of particles influencing their physical properties, and a series of tests find the observable properties, solubility, aqueous conductivity, and pH are performed and recorded, okay, that's describing the experiment briefly, then it will be possible to identify several unknown compounds based on the results of these tests. All right, here's what I think, here's what I'm going to do, this is what will happen if I'm right. That's what a hypothesis has to say. Okay, everybody follow? Right? Now, we also try and avoid using any first-person stuff. I didn't dock any marks for that, okay? But we generally try to avoid using I, we, okay, and things like that in a hypothesis. We try and make it third person. Now, you didn't have to write out the materials, okay? You could have written C sheet, but since I had the original document, I just copied and pasted, okay? Then for your procedure, I wanted some detail in the explanations of what to do for each step. Unfortunately, I did see a lot of get stuff, put in each depression, perform observable properties test. Okay, what if I don't know what an observable properties test is? Am I going to do it right with that explanation? Absolutely not. Okay, that's why your procedure needed to say, in an observable properties test, be sure to make note of the following properties. Okay, color, texture. Okay, if you're not sure what texture is, perform a crush test by crushing the material with a glass stirring rod. Okay, things like that. You have to describe each and every step so the person knows to do it the same way you did. That makes it a controlled experiment. If you don't explain it, they might do the experiment different. And as a result, they might get different data. Right? And that's not what we want. We want repeatability between different people performing the tests. All right, so step number 1, collect the depression plate, thermometer, stirring rod, conductivity apparatus, and pH strips from the front table. Take equal amounts, approximately 1 gram of each unknown substance, and place them in separate depressions on the plate. Record the following observable properties in a chart: color, texture, crystalline, waxy, molten, okay, state of matter, solid, liquid, gas. Waft the samples and record any odors and any other characteristics you feel are important. Okay. Next thing, using an eyedropper containing distilled water, or in this case, you guys use the wash bottle, okay, fill each depression to within 3/4 of full and stir briefly while taking the temperature of the mixture. Right? Important that the thermometer is in there at the time. Record whether the material is soluble based on the color changes to the water, changes in crystal shape, or any separation of the materials. All right, so again, I told them, here's how you can tell if it's soluble. Here's what to look for and record. Okay. All right, for the conductivity test, take the conductivity apparatus, place it in the solutions created in step 4, press the button, and record the reading shown on the face of your chart. I should have also said here in step 5, rinse the conductivity apparatus between tests with distilled water. All right, number 6, using pH paper or an electronic meter, record the pH of each of the solutions from step 4 by placing either the strip or the meter in the solutions. Compare the color of the strips to the color code on the pH paper container, or record the number shown on the electronic meter. Repeat these steps for all the unknowns. All right. Everybody with me there? So that's the level of detail we're expecting. You might have one more lab this year where you actually have to do the procedure. Okay, most of the time it'll be given to you. Then I was looking for your observations chart, and I was looking for it to be inserted in the right place. It should be right underneath the procedure, because the procedure is what got you that data. That's where that chart needs to go. All right, so it gets inserted into that place. All right, so again, you know, just kind of point form observations, good enough for me to be able to identify them later. Okay, analysis. Okay, found that ammonium nitrate was J. It was those little kind of off-white spherical crystals. Okay, they should have got a little bit colder when you put them in the distilled water. Okay, and they conducted electricity. Copper 2 sulfate was F. It was the blue crystalline solid. Okay, ethanol was one of the 2 clear liquids. Okay, it was the one with, how could you tell it from water? The smell, yeah. Okay, everything else, ethanol and water had exactly the same data all the way along, except that ethanol smells funny. Okay, sodium chloride was A. Okay, the first one you did. Sodium hydroxide was the kind of saucer-shaped greasy crystals, all right, that had a pH of like 14, all right, conducted electricity really, really well, all right, that was sodium hydroxide. Hydrogen chloride was D. It was the one I told you was already dissolved for you, but normally came as a crystalline solid. Sucrose, so sugar, was K, all right, was the very last one. Water was G, okay, the other clear liquid. Cobalt 2 chloride were the red crystals, and I. Nickel chloride were the green crystals, H. And paraffin was the waxy soap-like flakes. All right, that one threw people. A lot of people weren't sure about that one. I had that one confused with sodium hydroxide several times. Now, sodium hydroxide is what kind of a compound? Ionic. So it should have done what? It should have conducted electricity. Paraffin is molecular. It doesn't dissolve or conduct electricity. All right, so that would have been the obvious differences there that could have told those 2 apart. Right, but a few people got confused on that one. Okay, the paraffin just really kind of threw people because it was waxy, and the sodium hydroxide also looked a little bit waxy. All right, the paraffin guys, all they did was take one of those scupulas and just whittle away on a candle, making little flakes of candle wax. Okay, that was all it was. All right. Yeah, but a lot of people, oh, it's like soap. Well, it does kind of, because if you whittled away on soap, it'd be pretty much the same thing. Okay, it would look kind of the same. All right, so that's the analysis. That's what you had to do there. Then for your conclusion, what I'm looking for is the hypothesis copied and pasted, essentially, or restated differently. So if all compounds have unique combinations, blah, 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 okay, this hypothesis is acceptable because each of the samples did indeed have a unique combination of physical properties. All I'm doing is restating the data I got. Every single one had at least one thing different than everything else. Okay, that allowed them to be classified as ionic, molecular, acidic, or basic, and then identified. All right, so all those things I said in my hypothesis, I was able to do. All right, and I didn't just say I was right because I was able to identify them. I said, here's why. Here's what I saw. This is what I did. That's why I was right. Okay, sources of error. You need at least 2. Okay, I had a lot of people that just had 1, and as a result, a lot of people lost 1 mark there. Okay, sources of error, biggest one, how much of the compounds you had to deal with. That small of an amount, okay, and that small of a space to work in makes things difficult. All right, was that beyond your control? Yes, it was. You were told to do it that way. Okay, on our reactions lab, you'll get a big, it looks like a giant contact lens. Okay, it's called a watch glass. It's about this big around. Okay, and you'll do the reactions in there. You'll have a lot more of everything to work with, and everything will be a lot more obvious when you're dealing with that much more of it. Okay, so the amounts used in the lab were very small, and this made reading the solubility tests, observable properties difficult due to the limited mass to deal with. To improve this, larger amounts of each sample could be given to each group. Okay, so we tell what's wrong or what we thought was difficult and how to make it better. Okay, second one, common source of sample for all groups could have led to accidental contamination of the samples, and this could have interfered with the collection of good data. To improve this, sealed samples could be given to each group. Okay, way to improve that. Another source of error we discovered, 1 or 2 of the wash bottles were actually filled with what? Tap water. Okay, and that interfered with getting good data because it gave conductivity readings when it shouldn't have. Right? Obviously, there was no way for you to know that. We had to assume they were filled with what they were supposed to be filled with, which was distilled water. All right? So you could say that is a source of error. Some of the wash bottles were apparently filled with tap water, as our water sample gave a conductivity reading, and it should not have. Okay, something along those lines. In the future, wash bottles should be dumped and filled prior to doing the lab. Okay, that'd be a way to fix that. All right? So that's what we're looking for in the lab. Okay. You should never say in the lab went great, there were no problems. There's always something that could be done better. Tell me, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I make the lab so that you have something to pick at. All right? I'm not going to go, oh, you're such a jerk for saying that, I'm going to dock you marks. It's not that. Okay? It's not about that. It's about, hey, you saw that there were problems, and that's good that you were thinking, okay, critically about what was going on. All right, and then there's the class discussion stuff. Okay, this sometimes ends up in like multiple choice questions on the unit exam, things like that. Okay, so first class discussion question, what was the purpose of testing distilled water? What was it acting as? Okay, well, why did we use it? Yeah, we used it as a solvent, and we used it because it never gives a conductivity reading. Okay, it was essentially a control, right? We didn't have to worry about it interfering with any of the other tests. Okay. What were some notable differences between the behavior of molecular and ionic compounds? What was the biggest difference? Right. The ionic ones conducted electricity. Okay. The ionic ones did not. Okay. Which group of compounds, ionic or molecular, showed the most extremes in pH? The ionic. Okay. Sodium hydroxide, strong base, ionic. Hydrogen chloride, strong acid, ionic. Right. Your molecular ones, they were all right around what? They were all right around 6, 7, 8, okay, somewhere in there. All right, and then were there temperature changes noted in any of your tests? Yeah, there were a couple. Okay, when you added water to sodium hydroxide, it got a little hotter. Okay, that's a chemical reaction. When you added water to the ammonium chloride, it got a little bit colder. And you may or may not have noticed, but when you added water to the hydrogen chloride, it should have also warmed up a little bit. Okay, you do have to be very careful when adding. When mixing water and acid, because it is exothermic. All right. In fact, when you dilute an acid, so when I take the concentrated version of it that we have locked up in the acid cabinet and make what you guys use, I have to pour the acid into water. You never pour acid into a container and then add water to it. It's so exothermic it'll shatter the glass. Okay. You always want the acid to go into more water because the water can absorb the energy. But if you're adding a small amount of water to a large amount of acid, the acid doesn't have the ability to absorb that energy. It goes straight into the beaker, and the beaker can't take that rapid change in temperature, and it'll shatter. Which is bad because it has a lot of strong acid in it when it shatters, and yeah, generally it's all nasty. Okay, so yeah, case and safety thing for later. All right, questions on any of that? All right. Make sure you make note of any places where you lost marks this time so that next time you don't lose marks in the same place. Many of you did send your stuff to me ahead of time to have me look it over, okay? And that's great. I'm glad that you did that. Notes for next time, again, make sure you get them to me before 5 o'clock the night before, otherwise I won't look them over, okay? Second thing, I look at it once. Okay, I had a few people that were sending it to me like, okay, Mr. Gary, I made that change. Now can you look it over? I'm happy to look your stuff over once, okay, but I'm not going to look it over 4 times. All right, so send it to me when you think it's done. I'll give you some tips. You make those changes, okay, and we'll kind of leave it at that. I only have so much spare time hanging around, okay. But yeah, it's definitely an advantage to do that, and it's definitely helpful to watch the podcast while you're putting those together. Okay? Questions? All right.